Hello and welcome to Fly With Your Shadow, the podcast all about music, mental health, and illness, and the mess that the COVID pandemic has made of all of it. I'm Jeff Robson, and this show comes to you from my home in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. This is our 5th episode, and I really want to thank everyone for listening and encouraging me so far. I really hope that you're enjoying the show and getting something out of it. I got a lot of positive feedback about our last episode featuring Nikki Maida of the Waylon Jennies. If you missed that episode, I hope you'll go back and give it a listen. In the interview, Nikki talked all about her successful music career and told us about how she's doing it all while managing a bipolar illness. She talked about how it was common in artists, and I've been finding out just how true that is. In fact, we're speaking with another successful musician with a bipolar illness today.
My name is Ben Delacour. I am a musician and, I was a musician. Now it's unclear what I am now. And I live in Nashville, Tennessee. Music City.
Ben Delacour has led an interesting life, to say the least. His official biography says, after playing New York City dives like CBGBs with his brother a decade before he could legally drink, he had already stuffed himself into a bottle of bourbon and pulled the cork in tight over his head by the time he was 21. There were arrests, homes in tough neighborhoods all over the world, countless false starts, as well as stays in psychiatric hospitals and rehabs, as Ben battled with mental health and substance abuse issues. These days, he's a folk-rockin singer-songwriter living in Nashville, Tennessee. You can find out a lot more about him at his website, bendelacour.com, and you can purchase his albums on Bandcamp and iTunes. I first got to know Ben in 2017 when he came to Winnipeg and played a house concert in my living room. That night, I became a huge fan, and Ben and I became fast friends. The next year, he was applying for grant funding to come back to Winnipeg to make an album with our friend Scott Nolan. That happened in 2019 during a February polar vortex when Winnipeg was colder than the North and South Poles. In spite of the cold, or maybe even because of it, Ben and his brother came and stayed with us during the making of that album. That album, called Shadowland, was released in early 2020, and it's brilliant, musically and lyrically. One of my favorite records of the year, for sure. Ben writes some powerful songs that are often dark and disturbing, but always very real and easy to get drawn into. Ben is especially honest and open in this episode. Once again, I gotta warn you that if hearing straightforward talk about mental illness might be difficult for you, I really hope that you'll get help immediately. There are some great resources that might help on the show's website at flywithyourshadow.com. The best way to start your journey to health is always with a doctor. If your doctor doesn't understand or doesn't help, then find another one. Help is possible and very worthwhile. If you have questions, feedback, or just want to talk, connect with me on social media at flywithyourshadow, or you can always email me at flywithyourshadow@gmail.com. Let's dive right into my chat that I had with Ben Delacour, which was recorded in February 2021.
Look at all these people. How'd we ever end up here? I swear to God I'd give my firstborn for one lousy beer. Jerry said you wouldn't talk like that if they took yours away. How the hell do you think I wound up in this place?
All right, so the uncertainty of that introduction leads me to wonder kind of what happened in the year. So I like to start out at the beginning of 2020. We all had plans and hopes and dreams. Before those got stomped on. What was your plan for the year? You had this great record that was going to come out.
Yeah.
So I assume there were plans in place.
Yeah, I mean, back then I was just a crazy kid with a dream, Time has not been kind to my once youthful features. Yeah, I had that record that I really loved that I recorded, as you know, up in Winnipeg when I lived in your basement with my giant Viking brother that I made with Scott Nolan. And Honestly, I decided just to go ahead and put it out. Kind of. Okay. So I'll go back. In February and March, I was on tour in Australia, which is excellent, super fun experience. Even though I wasn't doing very well at the time, but the whole experience was great, and I I got lucky too that the pandemic only kind of started uh, ramping up the last maybe week that we were there. So I kind of only missed out on maybe 4 or 5 shows, and I had to come back like 3 days early. So I got up pretty lately, and then came home into lockdown, and then I kind of decided to put the record out anyway in May, and I'm really glad I did. I think that um, for a lot of reasons, but I think it was honestly a good move. And then I figured that if it just dropped without a trace, then I could blame the pandemic, which is the key for me.
But it didn't. It seemed like it got a great reaction. I mean, it's getting
Yeah.
on all kinds of lists, and the reviews seem to be pretty much universally positive.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for that. I mean, like you can't put too much stock in the external validation because it's kind of a sinkhole, right? The more stuff that you pour into there, the bigger the sinkhole gets, and then it just swallows everything, including you. And then like I think that goes for both positive and negative external validation, right? So it's like the good you can be like, yeah, thank you, I appreciate that, and it's a practice, right, of believing that people mean it when they say it, and I think most of the time they do. So it's just kind of good to be grateful and like have some grace and say, yeah, thank you, I appreciate it, and just the publicist I hired, Heather West, she did just like an amazing job, and I had a really nightmarish experience with the publicist I hired before, um, for the last record, or not the one before that. So yeah, but I had a whole tour booked of the U.S. and Canada. I was actually doing a whole run of Canada and part of the Western U.S. with Richard Inman, who also, and man, I love that guy. I really think he's a fantastic writer and a really cool human, and we actually talk on the phone all the time.
So without the opportunity to go tour this record and everything, how did that kind of affect you? I mean, obviously you're a guy, I'm assuming, who makes most of his living by doing shows.
Yeah.
And I know it's good for you on a personal level as well to do those shows. So how did not having that affect you?
I mean, it kind of helped that everybody's in the same boat, so I wasn't like constantly looking sideways at all, friends and enemies who are just out there, playing tons of shows, and it was kind of like, oh well, we're all in this, and it's like what can you do? You can only play the card you're dealt, and we were all dealt something of a shitty hand, but I feel like through luck and circumstance and also hard work, I was able to kind of do the best I could, bluffing with like a 3 high, through 2020, and I don't know, like I definitely feel like I sold. It's hard to tell, but I sold way more records even without touring this year than I normally do for the first couple of months. Yeah, I think because like everybody A wanted to support artists, and B they because I tour quite a lot, and I think a lot of people when I put records out there like, oh yeah, well we'll catch him when he comes through. Like, well, and I honestly don't care if people stream or buy it. I like it when they buy it at shows, but I don't care. I just want people to listen. And I think that the people who complain about Spotify, like there are all these boobs on Facebook and Twitter who post their Spotify royalties like, oh, thanks for 30 cents. But like, it's crazy to me that they all seem to be operating under this assumption that if Spotify didn't exist, that they'd be selling thousands of fucking records, and they don't even they play like 20 shows a year, and it's like what did you think was going to happen? Like that just your record would fly off the fucking shelves, like, for the 25 shows you play a year,
I don't know if that's the issue. It's just that Spotify makes billions of dollars and you end up getting 30 cents for it. Like they make their
Sure.
millions on your back and then don't pay much of it back to you.
Like, yeah, and that's of course a factor, but I think that we become so desensitized to corporate greed and just, that's just like, well, at least, like the way I look at it is at least we get something tangible from Spotify, and that is like that we can, not only as artists but as people, we can discover all kinds of music, which again is not without its negatives. Like I'm an older millennial, so I remember going to Tower Records and stuff when I was a little kid, and going to like little, like non-franchise, non-chain record stores in my neighborhood and talking to like the dudes who work there, and being like 10 years old and then being like, dude, you gotta Black Sabbath, you gotta check this out, or like, you ever listen to Slayer, get this record, and but I think that like, people nowadays, you can, if you do a little, like, that magic is gone, but there's the magic of being able to like go on Spotify and stream a record that consists of songs that are found on like North African cell phones, that you would never ever be able to find, and like every show I play, I feel like people come up and they're like, oh, I saw you were coming through and I'd never heard your music before, but I like the venue and I streamed you on Spotify and I dug it, so I came to the show, so like those people discover you and they come and they pay the ticket price and they buy a record or a CD or a t-shirt, and like they're into your music, they're fans.
So did you find that people quickly pivoted to buying stuff online, and whereas they would, like, I would assume that most of the time you sell your records from the stage. I would assume that's the biggest venue to sell them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have like physical distribution for my records in the US, but it's pretty limited, and I feel like, yeah, for sure. Like I think that normally people buy the vast majority of my records from the stage, whereas for this, it was like, I mean, obviously it wasn't selling a lot from the stage, but I feel like, it was a lot of people just kind of buying it, pre-order and ordering, which is great, man. I mean, I'm grateful for anyone who buys it or listens. I'm grateful for people streaming on Spotify.
So did you go through a transition where you were like, okay, now what am I going to do to with my time and to make money?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm deep in credit card debt. But I did. I weirdly ended up, an opportunity kind of just fell in my lap to sign with a new booking agency during this, and they do a lot of. They're kind of pivoting to doing a lot of online shows and online festival stuff. So that kind of feels like it's nice to have someone working on that end, and I've been kind of getting more comfortable with doing the live streams. And but yeah, I mean, I think it's a good thing. Like, it's dangerous to define yourself through something with so few tangible, positive feedback mechanisms as art. So I think it's it's dangerous when you just define yourself as an artist instead of like, okay, I'm a human who makes art. And I think that this year has been great. Like I got to spend like a solid 9-10 months hanging out with my daughter like all the time. I split custody of her with my ex-wife, and when I'm gone, obviously she picks up all the slack, for which I'm super grateful. But like my relationship with my daughter has just become incredible, and like it's just the best thing in my life, and I feel so grateful for that. And I feel grateful, like, learning to kind of define myself as something more than just a musician.
Yeah, because when you're so busy doing it all the time, I guess you don't take the time to evaluate the other things in your life and pay attention to who you are as that musician.
Yeah, you get very myopic.
And so do you feel like you're going to come out of this thing sort of feeling stronger and more confident as a result, or?
Yeah, like I kind of redeveloped some very bad habits over the last kind of before pandemic and early on in the pandemic, and it's really hard to break those bad habits when you're touring a lot, and I was able to get in a situation where I mean, it was awful, but where I ended up several times in the psych ward and stuff, as we talked about that, but those are like kind of like the pivotal moments where I was able to be like, all right, I need to address this, man. Like, this is really destroying my life. And so I don't think I would have been able to do that if I was out there playing 100 something shows a year.
Can you talk at all about, like, if you're comfortable, like what exactly was going on that led you there, and how you kind of worked out of it?
Yeah, I mean, so sure. I like had a gnarly relapse, not on alcohol. I still haven't drank in like 2.5 years, but I did the classic kind of addict thing where I was like, oh well, I convinced myself like, oh well, my problem is with alcohol. I can do like benzos and opioids and stuff, and it's fine. Like I can handle that. And then that just turned into an absolute nightmare. And actually kind of was harder. It's harder, I don't think I was ever physically dependent on alcohol, like I was just very unhealthy, like I was an alcoholic for sure, but I wasn't the kind of alcoholic that, like when I was in rehab a couple of years ago, the kind of people who, were like, while I was in the detox ward, who were like having full-on delirium tremens, seizures, that kind of stuff. So for me, it was like very tough to break the mental cycle and like have to realize that I was self-medicating and that like I was in denial about having some pretty serious mental health. After that, I got diagnosed bipolar, and I'm currently really well medicated for that, and have developed good, like I do yoga every day now. I meditate every day. And the kind of realization, I kind of stopped taking my meds as I should, and the realization that like, going into actual withdrawal is kind of a terrifying, because you're not only mentally trapped by these drugs, but you're like, oh my God, like I'm getting like sick. And that's just kind of like, if you already have existing mental health issues, like the way those compound each other, it was just absolutely awful. And I was just like, I'm just gonna kill myself. Like I can't get free of this. And so I'm very grateful every day that I had opportunities that a lot of people don't. Like when I got out of the booby hatch, they they released me into like an intensive outpatient program for like a month, and that was super helpful. And I'm actually planning to go to school this year for social work, like so I can help people who are, I want to go into various kind of institutions and talk to people who are in my position. And I think, I know for me, when people talk to me in those kind of places, who've been through what I've been through, it's a lot easier to relate to them and hear what they have to say. So hopefully, I can help someone who was in a position like me, the way that I was lucky enough to be helped.
So I know that for a lot of people, addictions kind of spiked like crazy during the pandemic. So do you think you got into trouble just because you were bored and didn't know what to do, or lonely and isolated, or all those things, or?
No, I mean, I think I'm pretty good at being, like, I feel more lonely usually around people a lot of the time than I do on my own, like
I totally
which I
know.
don't, yeah, I think you and I have a lot of similarities in fact. And so that really wasn't a big issue. I mean, the 2 weeks of isolation when I came home were hard because I really wanted to see my daughter. I'd already been away for like 3-4 weeks on the other side of the world, and but no, like I mean, I was already I'd already been in that cycle for like a year or more at that point. So like I'd had to quit using all those substances when I got to Australia because I didn't want to sneak anything in and get like kicked out of the country, and I had a really hard time finding anything, and so I was in pretty bad shape then. So like I really missed an opportunity, like of being all sobered up and stuff for a month, and then coming right back down and back here, and then just like going right back into it. But I don't think the pandemic made it any harder. In fact, maybe it made it easier because I was able to be more free of obligations, and I could just like focus on that and spending time with my daughter.
So have addictions been a big problem for you for a long time?
Oh yeah, I mean, since I was a kid, I mean, I don't think that I was like as dependent on those as a teenager, but I would like drop acid and go to school when I was like 14 years old, and like was smoking a lot of weed, and like would, you know, be out most nights with like my little ratchet friends drinking 40s and getting in trouble like you do, and kind of growing up in a big city. And you know, but they kind of like, you know, like they say, it's a progressive disease. And I feel like by the time I was in my early 20s, I kind of acknowledged like, oh shit, I think I have a problem. That was when I started trying to like quit drinking and quit other stuff. And it was like the typical alcoholic bullshit, like, oh yeah, well, I managed to like white knuckle it through 30 days, so I'm not an addict. And then like on the 31st day, I would like chug a whole bottle of whiskey and throw up on myself. And it's like, but yeah, I mean, it's something that it also runs in my family. As do like as does, you know, psychiatric illnesses of, so I kind of realized from a young age, like my brother's sober now too, and I think we both kind of got that. Although I think that for him it was more like he just got burnt out on it, as opposed to like I don't think he was ever in quite that deep, but deep enough, I mean, to change his whole life and get sober.
So do you think, like, did all those things contribute to you becoming an addict, or was it mostly just the social thing of hanging out with your friends and having fun, or how did?
I mean, you know, like, no, I mean, yeah, you know, it's the whole question, right, of nature versus nurture. And I think I was always a very sensitive kid, and so I was kind of like dedicated to obliterating that part of me from an early age. And you know, like, I mean, like, I feel like this as a parent, you know, when my daughter gets older, like, I feel like every kid goes through that phase pretty much, right? Where they, like, experiment with drugs and drink and, like, go a little bit over the edge. And, like, 90% of those kids pull it back. Like, they're like, yeah, well, that's not really how I'm trying to live my life. And then there's, like, the 10% who just realize, like, they feel so good and so normal when they start using those things that they're just like, I don't think I can live without it. And those are the people who, you know, whether it's like they had a chaotic childhood and they were just very sensitive to it, and they also had the genes, and they also had poor coping mechanisms for, you know, like, it's the same way that, like, you know, like, you can't quantify pain, you know, like, you can look how many times, like, it's such a cliche, like, oh, that so and so had everything, like, I can't believe they killed themselves. It's like, well, they didn't take that decision lightly. It's not like they just woke up one morning like, oh, you know, my shoelace won't stay tied, I'm gonna fucking hang myself, you know. Like, those people were obviously at the end of their rope.
Well, the other thing that I always like to tell people is that, like, us rational people without a mental illness or in that situation, we can't make sense of it.
Well, wait, are you trying to say that you don't have a mental illness?
No, I definitely do.
Okay,
I'm just saying that if
like
people who are looking on at that and trying to make sense of, because I've talked a bunch about suicide and stuff on this show, and it's kind of inspired by some people who committed suicide, and then I was trying to make sense of that later on, and then I realized, well, you can't make sense of that, because when we're struggling with a mental illness, nothing makes sense. Our brains are not making sense.
Right.
So we can't kind of make sense of it after the fact as someone who's lost someone and trying to figure out why.
Yeah. There's no way to, you know, I mean, but even if you have experienced those things, I feel like the way that mental illness plays tricks on you is when you're in a good place, you kind of have a hard time believing that you ever felt that bad, you know. And so when you see someone kill themselves or do something very harmful, you kind of, even if you are someone who suffered with mental health issues, you kind of feel like, man, I wish they could have just held out. They would have felt better. But when it's happening to you, it's the same way that when you're in a really bad place, you not only feel like you'll never feel okay again, but you retroactively look back on your life and realize, like, I've never had one moment of happiness. You know, like, that was all a lie. Life is worthless. Because, yeah, it's just the way your brain operates.
Yeah, I mean, but the other reason why I want to have these conversations on this show is because when you're in the grips of a mental illness or a situation like that, you feel totally isolated and alone, and like nobody will understand. You don't go and talk to people about it because you don't feel like anybody's going to understand or care. So, you know, if we have these conversations, maybe somebody feels a little less alone, or else maybe somebody else recognizes somebody in their life that might be struggling in that way.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You got to normalize it, you know.
Yeah.
Got to normalize suicide.
Well, there's nothing normal about it, but we need to not be so scared to talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
I've said before, it seems like the last real taboo. You can talk about just about anything else, sex, religion, politics, whatever, but people don't want to talk about mental illness and suicide. And
I
I
think
think
you're right.
that's a huge part of the problem, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think that, yeah, and why that, you know, the same way. I mean, part of the same uh, delightful cornucopia is, you know, addiction. Like the way that, I mean, I think you guys do a much better job. I think the U.S. is really leading, at least leading the Western world in denial about addiction and mental health. You know, like I think we have this puritanical hangover, you know, that we can't seem to get out from under. And I think it's super toxic. Like, you know, it's all part of the myth of American exceptionalism, which is like the toxic thing.
So can you talk a bit about what those mental health issues looked like or felt like in you?
I felt like an empty jar of peanut butter that somebody was scraping out with a butter knife.
Were you sort of forced to get help with that, or did you recognize within yourself that it was time to not feel that way? Or
Man, it was kind of a little of column A, a little of column B.
and so what kind of things helped you the most, would you say?
I mean, I think like any of these things, there's especially as addicts, we're looking for like, you know, because you're so used to using a substance and temporarily taking the pain away, even though obviously it causes more pain. That we're always looking for like the key to unlock the cycle and the key to unlock the pain closet, you know. But really, it was a combination of lots of things, like having like medical support network, psychiatric support network, working on instilling practices in myself, like, you know, mindfulness and meditation, yoga, and kind of those kind of things, and just the timing lining up, and you know, that's why I think treating those things can be so problematic.
Did it become easier once you had the diagnosis of being bipolar, or did it help you to make sense of any of those things, or kind of accept it better?
Yeah, I think it's always a relief, right? You know how like you hear people talk about cancer and sometimes they're like, oh, it's actually a relief being diagnosed, which sounds kind of crazy, but it's kind of a relief once you put a name to it. You kind of take away some of that power that it has over you, and you kind of are like, okay, well, I fit into this category, and this category is something that happens to, you know, that a lot of people experience, so I'm not alone. And this is also a thing, you know, once you identify it, then you can start to work on you know, models of treatment for it. And you realize that your pain is not unique, you know, which is another thing that we all tell ourselves, right? That we have this kind of exquisite pain is unique to us, and no one understands, and no one could understand, and you know, you become very self-absorbed as an addict, you know, like, which is why there's so many annoying people in sobriety, because they remove the substance and they do work, but they're just as self-absorbed as they ever were, and those people are the worst to hang out with.
Yeah, so once it's only you're only really starting to get better once you realize that you're not the center of the world, and
Yeah.
that you have a place in the world and things to do, and you need to listen as much as you need to talk and look at yourself, I guess.
Yeah, this lady who was tour managing the Australian tour, I remember walking into, you know, into this Thai food restaurant and just being like, man, I'm really not doing well. This is awful. I feel like everyone is like looking at me and judging me and blah, blah, blah. And I feel so like I just want to rip my skin off. And she was like, dude, no one gives a shit about you in here. Like, these people are living their lives. And she kind of, it was like a eureka moment. She was just like, you know, she'd been sober a long time, and she's like a very you know, like for every handful of annoying, self-absorbed dimwits that you find in sobriety, there's always one or two people who you kind of feel like you're in a room with a Dalai Lama or something. You know, they have this kind of like beatific, transcendent thing about them. You know,
They've
you're like,
actually
whoa,
figured it out.
yeah, and they've done the work, and they're just like, you're like, holy shit, this is like, this person is like transcended somehow, and she's one of those people, and I'm so glad I had her with me in Australia, and she was just like, dude, it's not all about you, you know, and it was kind of the way she said it was really kind, but also really kind of like firm, and I kind of was like, oh my God, you're right, you know, like these people don't give a shit about me, like they don't, you know, like, and that's great. You know, the same way as like going back to earlier, the suicide talk, it's like Camus said, right? About the only decision anyone has to really make is whether to kill themselves or not. And then if you don't kill yourself, you just got to accept the absurdity of existence. And that's like actually incredibly freeing. Life means nothing. It's fucking awesome. You know, like you give a meaning. You can do whatever you want.
Does it help you to put any of these things in perspective because you're a parent, do you think? Does it make it more important or more obvious that you have that the world doesn't quite revolve around you?
Yeah, that is really a gift of being a parent, you know, as I'm sure you've also experienced, like how you're like, I'm not the boring center of my universe anymore. You know, you're like, I mean, like I still matter, and I matter outside of my relationship with my daughter, but not as much. You know, like what I really, yeah, like it absolutely can be super healing, you know, if you're, as long as you're not like resentful of your child, you know, which some people are, and I feel really bad for those people. I feel even worse for those kids. But but it also is why it seems like such a cop out when people have a kid and they're like, well, I guess I'm gonna get a job at an insurance company or like blah blah blah. Like, and it's like, and then they blame their kids for it. It's like, dude, that's what you always, all you really wanted was to do that, kind of have that boring life. And I mean, maybe it's not boring to you, but if you complain about it and say you had to do it for your kids, like, what kind of example are you setting for your kids? That you just like have kids because you feel like you should, and then you're miserable for the rest of your life. Like, that's on you.
I mean, for a lot of reasons, I sort of grew up way too early and way too fast, and was always able to look out for myself, and just spent a lot of time and energy making sure that I was going to be okay. And then all of a sudden, you know, I had a kid, and I realized that I need to worry about you're going to be okay, and that's more important than the drama going on in my head. And
Yeah,
suddenly realizing that there's something bigger than you, or something, you know, that you have to worry about more, kind of changes a
yeah,
lot of that.
yeah, like exactly, and it kind of inspires you almost to like double down on what you love, you know, because you're like, I'm not only doing it for myself now.
Yeah, you're right about the other thing that you said about getting the job or whatever. We can't. I would imagine you can't give up touring and being, you know, that guy, because that's important to who you are, and that makes you sort of more important or more valuable, I guess, to your daughter. Like for me, you know, obviously I don't do that, but I go to a lot of shows, and there were always these times when Jeremy would say, well, like, why do you have to go out so often, and things like that. And it was like, well, you know, I need to do the things that are important to me, and I need to feel a part of this community. And whether you understand it or not, that kind of makes me a better father, a better person.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, yeah, I think that, yeah, you said it better than I could.
that doesn't happen often, so let's savor the moment.
Even a broken clock is right twice a day.
There you go. Do you worry about any of these things catching up to her? The mental health and the addictions and stuff?
Yeah, I very much worry about it, but you know, I realize that like I can only do the day-to-day thing and make her feel secure and loved and seen and support her decision. And you know, like I realized kind of one day that um like projecting into the future is just projecting into the future. So if I'm going to project into the future, why don't I imagine this beautiful, wonderful, magical life for her? Because like if that doesn't come true or it does come true, it doesn't change anything. The same way that like if something awful happened to her, me catastrophizing about it now isn't going to change that. All it's going to do is ruin my peace of mind, and probably I'll project it onto her, and she'll grow up all anxious and weird. Um, so all I can do is put the framework in place for her and just appreciate every moment that we have together and love her and try to be a good dad. Stick around.
Yeah, and I know she's kind of young, but certainly with me, like I think it's more important for us to talk to our kids about what's really going on, because that certainly never happened to me when I was a kid. Everybody would try to hide that stuff and normalize it, or just, kind of make it, oh, there's nothing to be worried about. But if we're more open about it and say, why we're worried about things or what's going on, then I think it automatically puts them at an advantage to deal with it if it happens to them.
Yeah, and they can talk about it, and it's not like a taboo, or it's not something they feel like they don't want to burden someone with. They feel seen.
You're going to school. What's that look like for you? I mean, does that force you to not do as much touring and stuff? Is that something you're looking at replacing the music with, or do you think you can still do both?
I mean, I think I'm going to have to do both. Music is really like my thing. I think, schooling for now will be online. So, and that's something you can put off. I don't have to do it all now. Where music, I feel like that's what I'm doing. And I feel like I couldn't imagine giving up playing music. And I can't imagine like not pursuing it for real.
I feel like even, as much as it sounds stupid, I think sometimes going to school just to actually learn things as opposed to going to school to get a job is probably a better experience in a lot of ways. So even the things that you learn and take from that, you can apply to your relationships and the people without necessarily it being your job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct.
So what's going on in the music world? Are you writing new songs? Is there are you able to feel creative at this time?
Yeah, I didn't give myself any pressure to feel creative, and that when I started taking the pressure off myself, I started feeling creative again. I've been I've been teaching myself piano, and just kind of, I've got most of the new record written. I've got way more songs than I could put on it, but I feel like there's a couple I still need some more.
So has it come to the part where you're planning to make a new record already? Is that a thought, or is it just in the creative phase at this point, like putting together the songs and then we'll figure out what to do with them?
A little bit of both.
It's so hard to tell these days when things are going to start up again and what they're going to look like. I don't know about down there, but we have lots of fears about the venues, how they're going to be, and festivals and all that stuff, how they can weather this storm and what it's going to look like when it's done. You're just kind of, it sounds like you're just kind of planning as if we can go back to what we had before.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I feel like this is a good opportunity to practice just acceptance of uncertainty. However it looks, people are going to play music, people are going to come out to hear music, and we'll, someone like Lightning Hopkins or Robert Johnson could jump on a train in the Jim Crow South and play shows where there's always a chance of some awful hate crime being committed on them, or being lynched, or being run out of town. I'm pretty sure that we can figure out, some white sad dude with a guitar can figure out how to play some shows.
Yeah, that sounds good. It sounds like you got the right attitude about it, and I wish you nothing but success with that, for sure. This has been really great, and I really appreciate you sharing so much and being so open and willing to talk about whatever.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing this podcast, and helping to normalize being crazy.
Well, I think I think everybody's crazy.
Yes.
But our own brand of craziness, I guess, needs to seem a little bit more, maybe not normal, but more common, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
There's enough of us out there that it's not so easy to ignore.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely. Yeah. You said it better than I could.
Ben is obviously a talented, hilarious, and charming guy. I really appreciated knowing more about his struggles. Most people who meet him or Nikki Maida, or me for that matter, wouldn't suspect that we're fighting a mental illness that makes everything a lot more difficult. We become masters of disguise because often our greatest fear is that others will find out that we're having a hard time. It's especially difficult, and if you ask me, especially impressive, because a lot of people like Nikki and Ben work so hard and are so good at what they do. They manage to achieve great success and acclaim in spite of a difficult illness that presents a lot of challenges and dangers. And I think it's even more impressive that someone as successful as they are is willing to talk about their condition so honestly. I hope that these conversations offer a bit of hope for anyone who might be struggling. You should know that you can achieve great things with a mental illness, and you can control it and live a great life. If you aren't battling a mental illness, consider yourself lucky, but it's highly likely that you know someone who is. It's really important to check in and look out for anyone you know who might be going through a hard time. Don't wait for them to call you. And it's important in general just to show compassion and understanding as much as you can. This show is and always will be absolutely free. It won't contain ads or pleas for money in any way. If you do want to support the show, please consider telling someone about it to help spread the word. Direct recommendations or even a quick share on social media could really help and would be greatly appreciated. I really hope you might consider helping Ben pay off some of that credit card debt by buying some of his albums or his t-shirts at his website, bendelacour.com, or on Bandcamp. There are links to his website and his music and places you can buy it at our website, flywithyourshadow.com. Please follow Fly With Your Shadow on social media, subscribe to updates on the website at flywithyourshadow.com, or follow the show on your favorite podcast provider like Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your music and podcasts. I thank you for listening. I hope you'll join me again on the next episode of Fly With Your Shadow.